They found her in the prince's bed, trembling, breathless, and clutching the royal bedsheet as if her life depended on it. Outside, the princess's wedding drums were still echoing through the night, but inside that chamber, nothing was as it seemed. And when the princess herself pushed open that golden door, what she saw made her drop her crown to the floor. But to understand that moment, we must begin 3 days earlier. The kingdom of Zandora was drowning in celebration. Streets glittered with lanterns, drums echoed through the hills, and the scent of roasted plantains drifted from every corner. In just 3 days, Prince Maliko would marry Princess Amina of the neighboring realm of Jora, a union promised since their births, meant to end decades of border conflict. But behind the smiles and cheers, the prince carried a heaviness no one could see. No one Sefu had grown up within the palace walls, the daughter of a laundress who'd passed away when she was only 12. Since then she had served in the royal chambers, dusting golden shelves, polishing carved ivory statues, and tending to the prince's robes. She knew the rhythm of his steps, the sound of his laughter, and the quiet sighs he made when he thought no one was listening. But lately, she had noticed something else. The prince's eyes lingered too long on the horizon, as if searching for a way out. That evening, as she laid a fresh cloth on the prince's dining table, Sefu noticed his hands tremble as he poured palm wine into his cup. "Is everything all right, my lord?" she dared to ask, her voice no louder than the hum of the candles. Maliko looked at her then, and for a heartbeat, it felt as if he might speak. His lips parted, then closed again. He pushed the cup away without drinking, murmuring only, "Not tonight." But the reason he didn't drink would only be known to her much later, when it was almost too late. Night draped itself over Zandora, heavy and warm. The palace corridors flickered with torchlight as the royal family dined in the grand hall. Laughter rolled like waves, yet in the prince's chamber, there was an unsettling stillness. Sefu entered quietly to prepare his bed as she always did. She reached for the silk sheets but froze. The prince's dagger, which always rested in its jeweled sheath by the bedside, was gone. The absence felt like a shadow. Her heart quickened. She turned toward the doorway, and there, framed by the golden arch, stood a tall figure. Not the prince. The man stepped forward, his face hidden beneath a hood, his movements silent yet deliberate. "You shouldn't be here, Sefu," he said softly. His voice was unfamiliar, but the gold signet ring on his hand was not. It was the prince's. So why did a stranger wear it? Sefu's breath caught in her throat. The hooded man stepped closer, and the golden light from the torches brushed against his jaw. His skin was the deep brown of river clay, his eyes sharp like the edge of a spear. He didn't look like a palace guard, but he moved like one. "Who are you?" she whispered, her fingers gripping the bedpost for courage. "That," he replied, "is a question you don't want answered tonight." The weight in his voice made her skin prickle. He glanced over his shoulder as if expecting someone, or something, to follow him. Before she could speak again, the heavy thud of footsteps echoed from the corridor. The man reached into his cloak, pulled out the missing dagger and placed it carefully on the bed. "If anyone asks," he said, "tell them the prince never left this room tonight." And then he was gone. Gone so quickly she might have thought she imagined him, if not for the dagger lying between the silk sheets. Minutes later the chamber door opened again. This time, it truly was Prince Maliko. His brow furrowed when he saw her. "Sefu? What are you doing here so late?" She hesitated. Should she tell him about the hooded man? About the dagger? About the strange warning? Her instinct screamed yes, but something in his weary eyes told her no. She forced a small smile. "I was just making sure everything was ready for the night, my lord." The prince gave a faint nod, but his gaze lingered on the dagger. The next morning the palace buzzed with preparations. Bright cloths were draped over balconies, servants hurried with trays of sweet plantains and honey cakes, and Princess Amina's arrival was the talk of every hallway. But behind the celebration, Whispers traveled like smoke, about the prince's strange absences, about late-night visitors in the West Wing, about secrets best left alone. Sephew tried to bury what had happened the night before, until she overheard two guards speaking near the courtyard. "They say the princess has spies in the palace," one murmured. "Then why is the prince meeting with strangers after dark?" the other replied. That night, Sephew found herself once again in the prince's chamber, not out of duty but out of unease. She wanted to ask him outright about the hooded man. But when she entered, the room was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of burning myrrh. Maliko was sitting on the edge of his bed, his head in his hands. "My lord," she began softly, "is there something?" Before she could finish, the door swung open with a sudden bang. And there, framed in the doorway, stood Princess Amina herself, a day earlier than expected. And her eyes were fixed on the bed. The golden light from the hallway spilled into the prince's chamber, and with it came Princess Amina. She was taller than Sephew expected, her skin glistening like polished mahogany, her braided hair crowned with gold beads that clicked softly as she moved. Every step she took seemed deliberate, the kind of grace that could calm a crowd or start a war. But in that moment, there was no grace in her eyes, only fire. Sephew's hands instinctively tightened around the bedsheet she had been folding. The princess's gaze slid from Sephew's face, to the dagger on the bed, to the prince, who had risen slowly to his feet. "Maliko," she said, her voice a whisper that cut sharper than any blade, "I traveled through the night to surprise you. But I see, someone else has beaten me to it." Her words dripped with controlled rage, and every syllable seemed to echo against the stone walls. The prince's jaw tightened. "It is not what you think." Amina took another step forward, her bracelets chiming like distant warning bells. "Then tell me, why is she here in your chambers, clutching your bed as though she belongs in it?" Sephew's chest tightened. Her heart pounded so hard she thought both of them could hear it. She opened her mouth to speak, to explain, but the prince raised a hand. Outside, faint drumbeats carried in through the window, their rhythm slow and steady, as if the entire kingdom were holding its breath. "Sephew is a servant," Maliko said, "and she was in your bed," the princess cut in, her tone sharp enough to slice through his excuse. Silence fell between them, heavy as the humid air. And then, without warning, Amina's gaze shifted, not to Sephew, not to the prince, but to the dagger lying on the silk sheets. Her eyes narrowed. She crossed the room in 3 strides and snatched it up. "This is not the dagger you keep for ceremony," she said almost to herself. "This one is for killing." The prince stepped forward, but she pulled the blade away from him. "Who was in this room last night, Maliko?" she demanded. His eyes darkened. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." And in that moment, Sephew realized, the princess already knew. The princess's grip on the dagger tightened, her knuckles pale against the deep bronze of her skin. The flickering torchlight caught the steel, throwing strange shadows on the wall, shadows that seemed to dance with secrets. "Speak, Maliko," she commanded, "or I will take this to your father myself." The prince met her gaze, unflinching. "If you do, you'll doom not only me, but both our kingdoms." Sephew's breath hitched. She looked from one to the other, confusion twisting inside her. "What does that mean? What's happening?" she asked. Maliko turned toward her. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "The man you saw last night was not a stranger. He was an assassin, sent not to kill me but to deliver a warning." The princess's eyes narrowed. "And you believe that?" The prince's answer was a single, heavy nod. Outside, the distant drums quickened, their beat urgent, almost frantic. Sephew felt the air in the room grow thicker, as though the walls themselves were closing in. "What warning?" she pressed. Maliko glanced at the doorway, ensuring no one was listening. Then, with a glance at the princess, he said, "That on the night of our wedding, blood will be spilled, and it will not be mine." Sephew's stomach nodded. There was only one other person in the kingdom whose death could shake 2 realms. The princess went still. Her voice dropped to a deadly whisper. Are you saying they intend to kill me? Maliko didn't answer, and that silence was louder than any confirmation. For a moment, the only sound in the chamber was the slow drip of water from a carved basin in the corner. Sefu's hands trembled. She remembered the way the hooded man had said, "Tell them the prince never left this room tonight." It wasn't a threat. It was an alibi. But why would an assassin want to protect the prince? Before anyone could speak again, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor. Heavy, armored, purposeful. Maliko motioned for silence, his eyes darting toward the door. The princess hid the dagger behind her back just as the guards appeared in the doorway. "My lord," one of them said, "your father requests your presence in the war chamber." Urgently. Maliko's jaw tightened. "Tell him I'll be there shortly." But the guard didn't move. He said now. Reluctantly, the prince turned to Sefu. "Stay here. Do not open this door for anyone, not even me, unless I speak your name." And with that he was gone, leaving the princess and Sefu alone in the dim chamber. For several moments neither spoke. Then Amina's sharp eyes swept over Sefu once more. "You're more than just a servant, aren't you?" she said quietly. Sefu swallowed hard. "I don't know what you mean." But she did. And so did the princess. The silence in the chamber was thick enough to choke on. The princess paced slowly, her gold anklets catching the faint torchlight. "You look at him differently," Amina said suddenly. "Not as a servant looks at her master, but as someone who knows his heart." Sefu's fingers curled around the sheet she still held, her knuckles pale. "I have served him since I was a child. That is all." The princess stopped pacing and turned sharply. "And yet, last night, you were the one in his room when an assassin came. Not the guards. Not me. You." Sefu felt her chest tighten. Memories pressed at the edges of her mind, memories she had buried deep. "My father," she began slowly, "was not a servant. He was a captain in the palace guard. He died protecting the royal family when I was 8. The queen, she took me in, raised me in the servants' quarters. But the king, he ordered that I be trained in secret, in case the prince ever needed someone who could protect him without anyone knowing." The princess's eyes narrowed. "A hidden guard." Sefu nodded. "But to everyone else, I am just a maid." Amina studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she glanced toward the window where the faint glow of the moonlight spilled in. "Whoever that man was last night," the princess said, "he knew you would keep silent. He knew the prince trusted you. That makes you dangerous and valuable." Sefu met her gaze. "If someone means to kill you, princess, you need me as much as the prince does." Amina didn't respond, but the faintest flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. Before their conversation could go further, the door burst open, this time without warning. Maliko stormed in, his face grim. "The wedding is tomorrow," he said, closing the door behind him. "But the king has just received word. There is unrest in the northern province. A rebel faction is moving south, and they have allies inside these walls." The princess stiffened. "Inside the palace?" The prince nodded. "Someone close to us." His gaze shifted between them. "From now until the wedding, neither of you is to leave this room without a guard you trust. And Sefu, that guard is you." Sefu felt the weight of his words settle on her shoulders. She had protected him in secret for years, but now the princess's life was in her hands too. Amina crossed her arms. "And what of you, Maliko? Who will guard you?" The prince's lips curved into something between a smile and a sigh. "The man who came to my sea the day of the wedding arrived under a sky heavy with storm clouds, though no rain fell. The streets were alive with music, dancers and bright cloths spun through the crowds, and the palace gates overflowed with guests from both kingdoms." Sefu remained close to the princess at every moment, her eyes scanning the faces, her ears tuned to the slightest change in the crowd's rhythm. The prince, in his gold-embroidered robes, walked ahead with the king, but his gaze found hers often, brief, wordless exchanges that said "stay ready." Inside the grand hall, the wedding feast began. Long tables overflowed with roasted meats, fruits glistening with honey, and steaming bowls of spiced yam. Musicians played a steady rhythm, though beneath it all was a tension Sephu could feel in her bones. She leaned toward the princess. "Has anything felt wrong to you?" Amina's eyes flicked toward the entrance. "3 of the guards there. I do not recognize them." Sephu followed her gaze and her blood went cold. One of the unfamiliar guards was the hooded man from that night. He wasn't wearing a hood now. His hair was braided tight, his face calm, but his eyes met hers with deliberate recognition. Before she could move toward him, the sound of shattering glass cut through the hall. A scream followed and then chaos. 2 of the unknown guards drew blades, lunging toward the high table where the king and queen sat. Sephu moved before she thought, drawing a hidden dagger from her sleeve and stepping in front of the princess. The prince was already in motion, intercepting one of the attackers, his ceremonial sword clashing against steel meant for murder. The hooded man, now without disguise, joined him, moving with deadly precision. Sephu's blade found the second attacker before he could reach the princess. The man fell, but not before whispering, "The bride must die." The hall erupted into chaos. Guests screamed, tables overturned, and the music ceased in an instant. Maliko's voice cut through it all. "Secure the doors." The surviving assassin was dragged away, but his eyes never left Amina. "You cannot stop what is coming," he spat. The princess's face was pale, but her voice was steady. "Tell me why." But the man only laughed, a low, chilling sound, before biting down on something hidden in his mouth. His body went limp. Hours later, the palace was quiet again, though the air still carried the echo of violence. The king ordered that the wedding proceed, fearing that delaying it would show weakness to their enemies. But in the prince's private chambers, Maliko, Amina, and Sephu gathered. "That man," Maliko said, "was from Jora, your own kingdom." Amina's hands clenched. Then this was not to stop the wedding, but to use it as a stage. Sephu spoke quietly. "Killing you here, in front of both realms, would have turned your people against Zandora in an instant. War would have been inevitable." The princess's gaze softened as it turned to Sephu. "Then I owe you my life." Sephu shook her head. "You owe me nothing. I only did what I was brought here to do." Maliko stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "Sephu, there is one more truth you deserve to know. The queen did not just take you in because your father died for us. She took you in because he died saving me. You have been my shield since I was a boy." The words settled between them, heavy with memory and gratitude. The wedding went ahead the next morning. There was music, dancing, and smiles, but also the unspoken bond between 3 people who had stood at the edge of a blade together. The story of the maid in the prince's bed became a whisper in the palace halls, twisted into gossip and half-truths. But those who were there knew the truth, that sometimes, what looks like betrayal is actually loyalty in its purest form. And as Sephu watched the prince and princess walk hand in hand beneath the golden arch, she felt no shame for the night she had been found in his bed. Because that was the night she saved the future of 2 kingdoms. Hamber's last night.